here's Joe Rogan on his podcast talking about his political transformation. And honestly, this is really instructive because people are debating with less frequency now that he's kind of made his political leanings clear, but where Joe Rogan lies on the political spectrum. And this is as instructive of a clip as it gets in terms of who he actually is in favor of.
This is oh my God, he admitted sort of clip.
Right. And that's capitalists. Here he is talking about how he used to be in favor of universal basic income until...
Today, the left has gone so fucking far left, so radical that the right are the ones that are celebrating comedians and celebrating Chappelle.
Yeah,
they had my back through all the crazy shit that happened with me.
Can you pause it?
Absolutely, man.
I did not realize that a guiding leftist principle was, healthcare for everybody. Let's address climate change and also protect comedians.
Yeah, exactly.
Comedians are the philosophers of today, the modern day Socrates of today. If you don't, they're the canaries in the coal mine. If a comedian can't pie someone in the face, the next step is the camps.
Yeah, and just to say, he goes into Fox News had my back when I went through all my stuff. What he means is when he was misinforming people about the efficacy of vaccines and ivermectin during a global pandemic. So
Fox News had his back.
And I think it's a little bit,
got my jokes, man.
Honestly, Joe, be explicit about what your stuff was. If you want to still own it, unless he's shy about how much he was pumping at ivermectin with charlatans.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about ivermectin anymore, frankly.
Because he's backed off of it. He doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, he can because Spotify was probably wag their finger. And also because, I don't know, there have been multiple fairly conclusive studies about the lack of efficacy to COVID.
A major left-wing plank, by the way, is raincoats for all, just in case you find yourself in the front row of a Gallagher show.
Yeah, I mean, honestly.
Today, the left has gone so fucking far left, so radical that the right are the ones that are celebrating comedians and celebrating Chappelle.
Yeah,
they had my back through all the crazy shit that happened with me. It was Fox News that fucking had my back.
Would you ever think that they would be the ones to cape for you, 10 years ago?
I'm so liberal. I talk about it all the time. I say I am not a conservative. I'm not conservative. But I am pro Second Amendment, and I am a hunter, and I am a cage fighting commentator, and I drink and I smoke cigars, and I like to bow hunt. Yeah. So there's a lot in there that's hey,
crossover.
Yeah, but it's just being a human. But I'm a compassionate person, and I believe that.
Remember that line there. I'm a compassionate person, and then directly where he goes from that.
Where does the compassion get directed?
I'll tell you what though. One thing that happened during this pandemic was it opened my eyes about human nature. I used to be very pro universal basic income. My thought was, wouldn't it be great if you just had enough money so you could eat and you could pay rent and then you could pursue what you wanted to. But the reality of human nature came fully into focus when I realized that when some people got all that money from the government, the COVID money, and then they got unemployment, they didn't want to work. I have a friend who has a restaurant. He could not get people to come back to work.
Yeah.
And so one buddy of mine, a bartender told him, I can come back to work, but I can only work for 20 hours a week because that way I get unemployment. So he wouldn't work more than 20 hours a week so he could get free money. So he could have made more money, but he didn't want to because he didn't want to work. So he was getting that free money. And then my friend was like, what the fuck, man? Yeah. Okay. And now he's always short staffed and it's a mess. Yeah. You see a lot of people
poor Joe Rogan's friend
that own businesses that have a hard time finding people work for them. So there's pros to that, right? The pros are people. It's a marketplace that favors the worker, so workers can ask for more money. So you're seeing a lot of places like bars and restaurants and stuff that have to pay more money per hour, which I guess is good as long as the restaurant can stay open.
So I guess a marketplace that favors the worker is good. I guess
except if but the bar my buddy has to stay open. So that whole thing about it being nice that you had enough food to do whatever you want, that's good and all, but if my buddy's bar isn't staffed, if nobody's making my cocktails, then they're no good. This is a problem. And I mean, this is the fundamental issue. We talk a lot about even with Democrats, we agree on certain social issues with them about, abortion, that sort of stuff. We agree with them, but the problem is getting them aligned on the economic issue. And Joe is equally disaligned with us on the economic issue. He wants to drive you back into serving a capitalist with desperation, using government policy to do it.
So he says, I'm pro Second Amendment, but I'm not a Republican. I'm pro business owners, and I'm his buddy. I'm not a Republican. People are lazy when they get government assistance, but I'm not a Republican. That is a hallmark of a reactionary influencer who is trying to hide the ball. Right-wingers have to launder their perspective through a feigned neutrality
Populism. It has to be
or populism, lack of alignment, because otherwise you are nakedly like a bootlicker pro-boss type and a capitalist rich guy who wants to compel workers back to work. So to me, like, this is just the route that a lot of these influencers have gone down, right? On the right. Well, Tim Pool is like this, just really quickly. Tim Pool's like this, where he pretends to be a liberal, but he's really a right. Everything he says is a right winger. Brett Weinstein is like this, pretends to be a liberal, but everything he says is right wing. I mean, do I need Dave Rubin? I don't need to. I can keep going down the list, but Rogan's just doing it in a different flavor. Go on, Brandon.
Well, I was going to say, I think a lot of this too boils down to like the fact that Republicans and their ideology as named is generally unpopular among certain sects of the population. You know, it's all fun and games to like want everything that they want. But once you start identifying as Republican, you know, even sans the stuff that it makes you seem like you're just like a team player, which some people can be instinctually against the idea of like, you know, I don't want to label myself that. But, you know, also like Republicans aren't cool. Like the modern Hollywood, you know, is not quote unquote liberal, but certainly it's not like pro-Republican. It's very much, you know, rainbow washing all of their problems away. And that is, you know, part of it makes Republicans a very easy punching bag, even if you are sort of like still feeding into the same like a cultural ideology that supports them. And so I believe that, yeah, you know, he might consider himself to not be Republican, but instead operating on some sort of like level of like, yeah, I just like common sense, bro. You know, I'm like a common sense kind of guy. I'm compassionate. You know, I think people should be allowed to eat, I guess, you know, as long as it doesn't get in the way of my buddy's, like, you know, my buddy's shitty sports bar. Right. You know, like obviously he needs to be able to underpay people. That's just like economics, bro. And so I think some of that has to do with the fact that, yeah, it's very easy for people to fall into reactionary thought patterns because they've been in many ways naturalized. Like, oh, I learned about human nature and I just know humans are like takers. So you can't just give them things, obviously. And it becomes easy for people to like hide in this sort of like, that's just the way things are. And I'm not, you know, left or right. I'm just speaking to human nature. But it's obviously, you know, it's a grift. It should be called out for what is like conservative. Like, not only is it conservative and reactionary, it's also just like, it's just not true. It doesn't work. You know, some of like, you know, some of them, and that's like the comedian thing too. It's just like, well, yeah, but comedians are just telling the truth about the way things really are and the way people really think. And it's like, they don't. And then they aren't, because it's just like, if people really thought that way, there would not be such a large pushback against the very obvious forms of bigotry. And you also wouldn't be so weird about calling yourself a Republican. But it's clear that, you know, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They don't want to be associated with them, but they want to have their benefits.
And it's like, very well, you might not be a Republican, you're a Joe Manchin Democrat. Like,
yeah,
that Joe, why don't you? And that's the, like, occasionally you'll get a guy like Madison Cawthorn, or I think Blake Masters also gave props to Joe Manchin, but like but that's a dangerous thing to do, because then you are starting to like delineate the corporate sort of one party state that actually runs this country. But Joe's absolutely a part of that guy. Joe, in his skepticism about like vaccines and all that stuff and COVID, guess what? We're moved to it. It's endemic now. We got rid of that. We got rid of that expanded unemployment for exactly the reason you want, Joe, because you want more people at your buddy's bar serving drinks because they are worried about their rent. I mean, that's just what people got to think about. The shabbiness of American fucking service is that capitalists can get it to you because all the workers there are hiding desperation and impoverishment if they didn't show up for that shift. Is that really helping you enjoy your cocktails? Is that really helping you enjoy your meals at restaurants? Or should we maybe figure out a better way to do this that isn't like
some people really like when they get to order a server around at the restaurant.
I mean, that's a major part of it. Yeah,
it's like, I mean, plantation owner mentality. That's disgusting.
You know, it definitely is. Some of it is like the explicit act of going out and being served, but some of it is just, even if you're not a restaurant person, the economy has to have that like hierarchy of people who have like made it and people who haven't made it. For some people, it's inherently, would feel it's inherently disrespectful to pay the person who's serving them drinks at a bar as much as they make if they're like, say, a doctor or a finance guy, even if they would not do that job and they're relying on people who do that job and they like when people do that job for them. There just has to exist this kind of like master servant or subordinate dominant relationship as emphasized by like, both pay and the clout that comes with such pay and sort of skilled versus unskilled labor false dichotomies. So it's not just that people like to order people around, but that our entire sort of like the entire promise of capitalism is that like you might have to eat shit from your boss, but at least when if you don't have underlings under you, at least when you go out or order food, you can make the delivery driver like fulfill some sort of stupid requirement, or you can like make your server jump through hoops by putting their tip on the table and pull one away. It's like our entire economy has to be supported by a sort of sadomasochistic tendency between like blind deference for people who have more than you and then like blind contempt for people who have less than you.
Yeah. Someone
Also, I
wrote
would
in
like
really quick, just to bolster Matt's point. Someone wrote in that basically what Rogan, I lost it. What Rogan was saying was compassionate conservatism, identical to W. Bush's 2000 campaign.
Right.
Yeah, go on, Binder. Sorry about that.
Two things. I'd love to know, like, as Rogan's telling the story, looking back, when was his buddy asking workers to come back to their bar, by the way? Like, do we remember why people got money during COVID? Because there was a friggin' pandemic? I mean, so that's probably one major reason why your buddy had a problem, along with the fact that, your buddy's bar probably didn't pay very well, because otherwise they would have gone back. Because I live in New York City, and throughout the pandemic, we were ordering out for delivery, and we had no problem finding places that were open and workers happy to work and get tipped and everything. So I'm assuming they probably weren't getting paid very well if people didn't want to work at your buddy's bar. But what I would really want to ask Rogan mostly is, what did you think the point, the purpose, the problem that gets solved is with universal basic income? Like, what did you think that would do for people? Having that baseline amount of, do you think everyone would just get that money and then continue slogging away at their shitty job for the rest of their life? Or that the ability to have those basic necessities covered would give people that push that they need, or would have otherwise, if it wasn't for worrying about covering those basic necessities, to find something better or try something new? How, I don't see how you could have said that you were for basic universal income and then you saw a slight version of it enacted and you went, oh my God, that's what happens? Like, you just didn't think this through, which means you never supported it to begin with. I mean, just come on, give me a break.
Well, it's like you like the idea of people not starving, but only if your buddy can still force them to come work for his bar.
Well, yeah, like not only is it the compassionate conservatism of like the George W. Bush era, and they would definitely want to distance themselves from Republican, but people like, Joe Rogan, and also I'll lump Bill Maher in there as well. They kind of give lip service to this idea like people are inherently lazy, they're inherently evil. We have to have this kind of like stick to motivate them in order to do things, because otherwise they would just like lay at home smoking weed and doing nothing all day. And it's just like, that's just secularized Christian dogma. There's no real evidence to support that. Like, if you give people enough money to fulfill their needs, they'll just like languish away, doing nothing at home. That's just what people are inherently taught to believe under like capitalism, and this idea that like, well, it's only through labor and toil people are made pure from like their inherent sin. And so like they give lip service. I think a lot of conservatives, or people who would not describe themselves as traditionally conservative, or like would scoff at being, the idea that they're like religious or repeating religious dogma, find themselves like in the trap of like actually doing just that, because it's been so effectively laundered into our mainstream political like discourse as just like facts and common sense about like people, that they're very likely just like, repeating things that they don't fully understand the origins of as just common sense. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up this. This is from our pals over at ProPublica. You can find every company approved for PPP loans. On It Labs, which Joe Rogan co-founded, which is the maker of his Alpha Brain and I think like sport mushroom or something. I can't remember what the it's literally a sport mushroom thing though, which incidentally this pharmaceutical company owned by the Unilever Corporation, which was formed in like the 20s between like a different colonial like the Dutch Royal African Company and like the British Royal African Company. So that's the type of not corporate guy this Joe Rogan is, but he took $2.4 million in PPP loans from the government. And I'm just wondering, like, did that disincentivize you from getting out and working, Joe? Or is it that you live in a plane of existence where your time, you only have to dedicate your time to work if the money value adds up, but everybody else needs that money value and also that fear of being homeless or hungry, and that's your populist Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
it's becoming like a thing, like a meme now, where someone says something to deny other people of some sort of loan forgiveness or debt forgiveness or a social safety net program that provides them with basic necessities or the money for basic necessities. And then all of a sudden you look up their company or their personal, work, and there it is, a PPP loan with some huge amount that was forgiven. I mean, they refuse to. This happened with that lib podcast Mueller, she wrote. You recall? Did you guys see that whole thing online?
I think it's
no. What happened? Tell me.
Oh, so Mueller, she wrote that that Russiagate podcast that was like super like pro like Democratic Party, capital D, defending them at all costs. She went on this whole big Twitter rant to her like 200 or 300,000 followers about how people who demand student loan forgiveness are selfish and they should just be happy with whatever's forgiven, and that they should call the families who lost children at Uvalde to see how they feel if they don't vote for Joe Biden or Democrats. And it turned out that they got something like $50,000 forgiven from PPP loans, and on top of that, got $75,000 in student loans forgiven through the government work program, where if you work for the government for a certain number of years, you get your student loans forgiven. So here's a person who's had over $100,000 of their loans forgiven, saying, bite me to the people who are asking for the same sort of help.
Well, she was actually in my mentions as well, I kind of assume that it's a woman. I shouldn't, but like the
no, it is like because she's not anonymous. The
head of the Mueller Most Foul podcast was in my mentions, and someone mentioned too that like they used that like she was taking money away from the other people who helped establish the podcast, that it used to be split 25 50, and then it was like they got changed like 92% of like the Patreon takings, and like they've been trying to get the rest of the money from her. And I'm just like, just with the Joe Rogan thing, there's a level of self-righteousness that comes from these centrist positions, but it's also just, again, secularized predestination in the sense that like I've made it because I deserve to make it, and anyone else who has not made it therefore does not deserve to make it, and that's just the way things are supposed to be. So people have naturalized this socioeconomic hierarchy we exist in various ways, and if not exactly naturalized, they've definitely normalized it. And so it's easy for people to justify them getting theirs and everyone else just sort of having to wait for it, I think, especially once you start, advocating that there's still some sort of meritocracy, which is what the far right is still clinging on to. But, I think, again, just like back to like the Joe Rogan situation for a second, I go to GNCs and vitamin shops all the time, and I've only ever seen Alpha Brain on the store shelves once. So clearly he's not working hard enough to push it. What if I'm out of Alpha Brain and I'm just out for a stroll? Like that's just, it's sloppy branding.
Tisk tisk.